لەگەڵ ئەم بارودۆخەی کە هەموو ناوچەکەتیا ئەژی لەم هەموو ئالۆزیە بەرامبەر بەوە لەو هەموو پێشکەوتن و کراونەوەی لە هەموو جیهانە ئەیبینین هێشتا بارودۆخی ژن هێشتا ئەو وەزعانەی کە ژن تێکەوەیە ئەو کێشانەیە خود ئەو ئاستەنگیانەی کە ڕوبەڕووی ئەبێتەوە هەستەکەین زۆر جار هەیە ئاڵۆزتر ئەبێ بەعزێ جارێک و زۆر جارێکیش وامان لێکا بە ئایندەیەکی ناخۆش یعنی نەتوانین بە هیوایەکەوە سێری زۆر شت بکەین لەگەڵەوەشە هەموو چالاکەوان یاخود هەموو ئەو کەسانی پسپۆرن لەو بوارە لە هەوڵێکان بەردەوام بۆ خستنەڕووی هەندێک لەو کێشانە و هەوڵدان بۆ هیچ نەبێت چارەسەری هەندێکی یاخود هەوڵدان بۆ بەرەو پێشخستنی ئەو بارودۆخە. زۆر بە خۆشحاڵیەوە چوار بەڕێز بەشداری ئەکەن لە سیمیناری ئەمڕۆ ئەو بەڕێزانش پرۆفیسۆر جێل هەیگە، بەڕێز تامان شاکرە، بەڕێز سۆفیا، بەڕێز نەزەنبەکی خانیە. ئەم چوارە هەرێکە و پسپۆرە لە جێی خۆیەوانێ و لە هەرێکی و لە جێی خۆیەوە توانایەکی خستۆتە گەڕ بۆ چارەسەرکردن یا خستنەڕووی ئەو کێشانە و هەوڵدانێک کە بەشداری بکات لەو کێشە گەورانەی کە مافی ژن و ناوی ژنی تێکەوتووە. زۆر بە خۆشحاڵیەوە بە خێراتنیانەکەین و هەروەها دەست پێکەین بە پێشکەشکردنیان. یەکەم پێشکەشکارمان بەڕێز پرۆفیسۆر جێل هەیگە، بەڕێزیان کەسایەتیەکی ئەکادیمیە لە زانکۆی بریستڵ لە ئێستادا خانەنشینە زیاتر لە 40 ساڵ ئەزمموی هەیە لە بواری جەندەر و تونوتیژیە، زیاتر لە 125 بڵاوکراوەی هەیە لەسەر ئاستی جیهان، زیاتر لە چەند کتێبێکی هەیە هەمووی کە سەبارەت لە بواری جەندەر و تونوتیژیا ئیشی لەسەر کردووە. بەڕێزیشان لە 2013 خەڵاتی پێبەخشراوە لایفتایم ئەچیڤمنت لە وڵاتی بەریتانیاوە. زۆر زۆر بە خێراتنیەکەین و دەست پێ بکە. حەزەکەم بەڕێزانی کەش هەروە کورتەیەک بەم لەسەریان و ئەنجا یان یەکەیەکە چۆن هینەکەین یەکەیەکە. پرۆف جێل هەی پلیز. دکتۆر نەزەنبەگی خانی بەڕێزیان بەشدارە لەگەڵمان، کەسایەتێکی ئەکادیمی و نووسەر و شاعرە لەسەر ئاستی لەوانەیە زۆر کەس هەبێت لەسەر ئاستی نەکەر کوردستان هەموو جیهان ئەیناسن لە بەشدارەکانی لە کارەکانی وەکو کەسایەتێکی ئەکادیمی وەکو کەسایەتێکی ڕۆشنبیر. بەڕێزیان پسپۆر و نووسەرە لە بواری جێندەرە و لە تونوتیژی دژی ژنان، زیاتر لە چەند بڵاوکراوە و دیوانی شەعری هەیە. یەکێک لە هەرە ئەو بڵاوکراوانەی کە زۆر ناسراون لەسەر ئاستی کوردستان و جیهان بڵاوکراوەیەک یاخود کتێبێکە بە ناوی کوشتن لەسەر بە بیانووی شەرەف یاخود کوشتاری ناموسپەرستی لە ئێستادا ڕاوێژکاری پێشکەوتوو و نێودەوڵەتیە لە تایبەت لە کوردستان بۆ خوێنی باڵا و جەندەر. بەڕێزیان براوەی خەڵاتی میمۆرالیاڵی ئێمە هەمڤەرسی بەریتانیا بۆ کار و چالاکیەکانی دژی کوشتاری ناموسپەرستی، هەروەها لە ساڵی 2012 خەڵاتی فیمینی سیمۆن لاندری فرەنسای بۆ شعر پێبەخشراوە. بەڕێستان فەرموون. تامان خان، تامان شاکر، خاتو تامان هەڵگری دیبلۆمی باڵا لە بواری ڕاگەیاندن. بەڕێزیان لە زۆر دام و دەستگای ڕاگەیاندنی هەرێمی کوردستان ئیشیان کردووە و چەند بڵاوەی تایبەتیان هەبووە لە بواری میدیا و ژن و مافەکانی ژن. ماوەیەکی زۆر پێشکەشکاری بەرنامەی شەن بووە لە تەلەڤیزیۆنی نەورۆز و رادیۆی میزۆپۆتامیا بۆ ماوەی ساڵ و نیوێ کار گێڕ بووە. لە 2006ەوە تا 2013 بەڕێوەبەری نووسنگی ڕاگەیاندن بۆ لە وەزارەتی ڕۆشنبیری، ئێستاش هەر لەوێ بەردەوامە لە کارکردن. بەڕێزیشیان زۆرینەی نووسینەکانی و تایبەتمەندیەکانی لە بوارەی کێشەی کۆمەڵایەتی و کۆمەلگای کوردی و هەروەها لە کێشەکانی ژنا. بەڕێزیشیان فەرمونە بەردەمان. زۆر سپاس. پێشکەشکاری چوارەممان سۆفی موسایە، نووسەر و ڕۆژنامەنووسێکی فەرەنسیە لە بواری ڕاگەیاندنە ئیشەکە. چەندین کتێب و وتاری دەربارەی مافی ژن و شۆڕش و میدیا هەیە و ئیسلامی سیاسی. بەناوبانگترین نووسراوەکانی مافی ژنان و شۆڕشی فەرەنسیە مەسەلەی کورد لە سەردەمی داعشە، هەروەها ئێستا خەریکی توێژینەوەیە کە لەسەر ژنانی جەنگاوەر لە دژی داعش. هەروەها گرنگیەک و بایەخێکی تایبەتی هەیە بەو ژنانەی کە تووشی ڕەنگدانەوەی داعش بوون، بە تایبەتی ژنانی یەزیدی. فەرموویە بەخێر سۆفی پلیز. لإستادا يكم پێشکەشکارمان بەڕێز پرۆف جێل هەیگا بابەتەکەی بەناوی تونوتیژی violence against women in zone and of war and conflict. Floor is yours.
Rosbash, I'm going to speak to you in English. I'm so honored to come and be able to speak at MERI, and I know what a wonderful institute it is. I'm also honored to be able to come to Kurdistan to make my small contribution to society here, to work with Dr. Juan and also Dr. Nazem Behihani, who is, of course, an inspiration to us all in this field. It's my honor to work with Nazem. This is about my fourth visit. Nazem and I have worked on violence in the name of honor and developed the first action plan on honor-based violence in the whole region here in Iraqi Kurdistan. We have a copy of our very beautiful book, which you can have a look at afterwards. I also have the honor of working with Dr. Juan at the University of Suleimania, where we are developing, as I think she said, the Gender and Violence Studies Center together. I'm going to talk very basically, give a very basic, general presentation about violence against women in war and conflict, to situate a little bit, to provide some general information, to situate the situation you are facing here. And I always must say that these issues are very distressing issues. So you may find they're distressing and upsetting, and if that is the case, please make sure you get some support from somebody and try to not let it really affect you too deeply, because we have to keep our strength. Wrong one. So, violence against women in war and conflict. Well, one of the great silences and repressed issues throughout history has been sexual violence against women in war. Now it has a lot more publicity than it did before, but even so, it's still a silence in many parts of the world. In recent years, in fact, violence against women in war has reached epidemic proportions. And unfortunately, rape and sexual violence in war are committed in almost all wars, usually by the victorious army. Sadly to say, in every war, pretty much, the victorious army will commit sexual violence, and also during the struggle. Sexual violence and other sorts of violence against women in war have the effect of, or are actually almost deliberately intended to, terrorize the local population, break up families in the population under attack, destroy communities. Once the women have been dishonored, the women have been raped, the community may be destroyed. Change the ethnic makeup, perhaps, of the country concerned for the next generation. Sometimes rape is used to deliberately infect women with HIV. Sometimes rape and extreme sexual violence can render women unable to bear children, or where ethnicity is inherited through the male line, rape is often used to make the woman bear children, which will then be of the victorious side. We have report after report of sexual assault, sexual violence, sexual mutilation and torture from countries across the world. Often this is used to humiliate the woman's husband and family, and he may be forced to watch this happening, as may her children. Apart from this, when a village is attacked or that kind of thing, there's also just day-to-day rape during conflict. When in the conflict zone women are on their way to school or to work, they may well be attacked abducted, possibly blindfolded, beaten, and experience shattering sexual assault. In August 2015, the United Nations Security Council warned that rape and sexual violence are being used as a direct weapon of war in Syria and in Iraq, and that these acts are indeed war crimes. Daesh, ISIS, is creating actually a theology of rape, including sexual slavery, but also abductions, killings, torture, and forced marriage. However, sadly, these issues are in no way unique. Violence against women in war takes different forms in different places and different cultures and different societies, and it's important not to generalize and homogenize and put them all together, but to have an analysis of each. But to give you some examples, in the genocide in Rwanda, Central Africa, in 1994, more than 500,000 women were raped and subjected often to sexual mutilation. We have called that genocidal rape. In 100 days, in 3 months, between 100,000 and 250,000 women were raped. We have evidence of this. In the civil war in Sierra Leone, also in Africa, between 1991 and 2002, more than 60,000 women were raped. And we have evidence there that the rape was used as a totally deliberate tactic of the war. Moving now to Liberia, more than 40,000 women, we have evidence, were raped and mutilated in Liberia between 1989 and 2003. And we also see high levels of sexual violence in hidden conflicts that we don't know about. For example, in Myanmar, used to be called Burma, where they had a recent election, as we know. So we have some hope for that area. In Europe, up to 60,000 women were raped in the former Yugoslavia, the Bosnia area, between 1992 and 1995. In the Democratic Republic of the Congo in Central Africa, more than 200,000 women have been raped in a decade of conflict. And we have reports from those women of being raped, and then if they resist, being beaten or being tied down, so they could be raped some more. In 2014, there was a rape trial, and they're still going on, these rape trials, in one village where about 1,000 women had been raped, and 37 men are being tried at this trial. This woman is having to be covered completely head to toe, all of... Where's that thing? No, that's not the right one. Let's go back. There we are. All of the rapists, the 37 men, are all in the audience. And if they find out who she is, then the repercussions could be extreme, you can see. Now, this woman, the soldiers came and to her house. Her husband had fled. They came to her house. She had 5 children. The 5 children scattered and hid in the house. She was brutally raped many times by the soldiers. The next morning, the husband came back. When he found out what had happened, he left his wife and has never returned. So how brave is she now to speak out? This is a 2-week-old baby in a special refuge for women who have experienced sexual violence. What happened in her case was that she was a 15-year-old girl. She had seen both her parents killed. She was then raped by the incoming soldiers and became pregnant. She's giving birth to this gorgeous baby, and her village have driven her away because of the rape. So she has nowhere to go. Sexual slavery of women, of course, we see it here with Daesh. But it does occur quite widely in war situations. It's not only in the ISIS areas. The difference is that in most cases the soldiers concerned can be kind of shamed about it, but of course we know that for ISIS they are actually broadcasting it and publicizing it. They are not ashamed. But we have other examples in Guatemala in the 1980s, in South America, brutal dictatorships there and the struggle, and we have direct evidence of women being held as sexual slaves in Guatemala. In the South Sudan, a new country now, established 4 years ago, but unfortunately has had now 21 months of horrible conflict. And we see there these young men raping with impunity. You often hear that phrase, raping with impunity. This is happening right now, unfortunately, in the South Sudan. In Chad, another example of sexual slavery. This was in the 80s when this hearing is hearing evidence from women who were sexual slaves of the then army of the then dictator. They are now testifying. This is a testimony in October 2015. That the soldiers of the camp had repeatedly held them as sexual slaves, really, repeatedly raping them. One woman described being held and having to watch while her 13-year-old daughter was repeatedly raped in front of her. Just one more example, the comfort women in the 1940s, the use of women and girls from Japan, abducted and forced to be sexual slaves, really, for the Japanese soldiers in other countries. Here we see some of them at the time. Now, this issue has been pushed aside for so many years. Now it's hitting the media more, the Japanese politicians are talking about it, but it's been overlooked for all those years, and so now at the very end of their lives, with these trials, these women have a chance to finally place their abuses on record. I have a quote here from the UN. These brave women have broken a long silence to talk about the most painful things possible. This woman was abducted from her home at age 12, imprisoned, forcibly taken to China, where she was held in a military brothel for 5 years. And now, at the very end of her life, she is speaking about it. So how brave is that? We do have very disturbing reports from the United Nations and Human Rights Watch. If you don't want to listen to these things, you can just put your fingers like that. But the searing magnitude of what the researchers for the United Nations and Human Rights Watch found was almost overwhelming for them, the researchers. Terrible horrors, wombs punctured by guns, women's private parts having rifles forced into them, being cut repeatedly with glass and with knives, so that they may then have fistulas, may be unable to bear children, would quite likely be disabled, spend the rest of their life in pain, or die of blood loss. Pregnant women being beaten and beaten until they miscarry on the spot. Fetuses being ripped from wombs. Report after report of gang rapes in refugee camps and elsewhere, where women will be raped by one man and then by the next and the next and the next, and rape camps where women are taken and held in the rape camp. Systematic, in some cases, sexual mutilation. The UN says that we saw scars of brutality so extreme that survival seemed for some a fate worse than death. We also, of course, have to think about displaced communities. 80% of people displaced by war are women and children, and they then have no protection probably because their husbands are gone or dead or fighting, and they often experience severe sexual exploitation In Sierra Leone, where I mentioned before, of the displaced women, 94% experienced sexual violations. Moving on now to post-conflict. Unfortunately, we do see, and we have evidence of increased domestic violence and sexual violence in a post-conflict zone, partly because the men, of course, have been conditioned to behave violently. Post-conflict, we sometimes see in terms of the impact, long-term trauma which will be experienced by these women for the rest of their lives. We see the rejection of the children of rape, and the rejection of raped women, who may then, of course, be unable to marry, and may be, as we just heard, driven out from their communities. Ostracised. Rape carries a severe social stigma in this country and in most countries of the world, African countries. So if you have been raped, the severe social stigma is such that you may be ostracised, blamed, and driven away. The spread of sexually transmitted diseases when a raped woman becomes HIV positive and does have further sexual relationships. Suicide, of course, and sometimes forced suicide by family members who maybe coerce or even force the woman to commit suicide because of the dishonour to their family. So we have in the world a spectrum of gender-based violence. Gender-based violence was there before the conflict. It occurs in all countries of the world, especially particularly male-dominated ones, but in every country. And the World Health Organization, the most august health organization we have, estimates that 1 in 3 women across the world will experience some form of violence and abuse. But that violence is exacerbated by conflict. Exacerbated. Family relations often become more violent post-conflict, so that the tragedy of war gets played out, as so many other things do, on women's bodies, not only now, but into the future. There are many international efforts, though, to combat violence against women in war. I'll try and be a bit more cheerful about this. Excuse me, rape and other forms of sexual violence, sexual slavery and torture are now accepted as war crimes. Now, the fact that rape is now universally recognized globally as a war crime is because of endless work by activists. Many of the activists were in the global south, and they worked and worked and worked from the 1990s onwards to get rape accepted as a war crime. On the back of that, we have a series of very important UN Security Council resolutions, starting with UN Security Council Resolution 1325 and various follow-ups till now. 1325 was passed 15 years ago, and activists in the UN and elsewhere have worked relentlessly to implement 1325 where they can. It gives some guidance on sexual violence, on what to do, and it also advocates that survivors and women activists are involved in working out what to do. Of course, it's the UN, so it can be criticised for being paternalistic, for being a top-down analysis and imposition from above. You must do this to deal with sexual violence in your country. Sometimes could even be seen as racist, some people have claimed. And also, of course, the 1325 and the other global instruments tend to generalize about women, whereas we might want a more intersectional analysis of women. And also, the actual powers of implementation are weak, and there is never enough funding to do what is needed. But a variety of global instruments and strategies do exist. The Global Preventing Sexual Violence in War initiative exists. National strategies and national action plans, as you have had in, not so much Kurdistan, but in Iraq. So there are attempts to make this better on the international and global level, also on the national level. And also the picture of violence against women during conflict is not monochromatic. Women are not always victims. Sometimes, as we know, women can be combatants, and of course we have courageous women, Peshmerga, here. Also, we can talk about the empowerment projects. There are empowerment projects for women who have experienced sexual violence in the past from war, projects to provide awareness raising, to provide psychological support, to try and enable the women to heal, and also to find new ways forward. Now, this is a picture from the Dalawesh conference we were all at. This is of 4 Yazidi women, they have not particularly experienced sexual violence, but they have been driven away by ISIS, and they're now living in the Duhok refugee camp. And sorry, go back again. Shada, who some of you know, has organized these young Yazidi women to become photographers. And they had mounted an exhibition of photographs, these wonderful young girls. They're 16 or 17. And I put this picture because one of them is in traditional costume, but I just wanted to for you to see them in their ordinary clothes too, just looking like anybody else. So they are being empowered, and they are able now to take photographs and mount an exhibition. So these things are possible. Participation of violence survivors as builders of peace, reconciliation and recovery. Women from Yemen and Liberia won the Nobel Peace Prize for their efforts to build peace with women. And of course, women's resilience and strength can win through against these things. Community resistance can be built. International solidarity and help is useful. And our basic humanity, perhaps, can help us to move forward with dealing with these terrible atrocities. So, thank you. So spas.
Thank you, Prof. Jill, for a great and painful presentation. زۆر سپاسی بەڕێز پرۆفسۆر جەلهەیگەکەین بۆ بابەتەکەی. ئێستاش بەڕێز تامانشاکر بێتە سەر ستێج و خۆی بابەتەکەی خۆی پێشکەشکا. بابەتەکەی لە سەبارەت بە میدیا و جەنگە ڕۆڵی میدیا لە بەرەنگاربوونەوەی تیرۆریزم.
ڕۆژتان باش، زۆر سپاس بۆ مێری، زۆر سپاس بۆ نەزەند و جوانکان. سپاس بۆ ئێوە. بێگومان من بابەتەکەم بۆ کردی پێشکەشەکەم باس لە ڕۆڵی میدیا ئەکەین لە بەرەنگاربوونەوەی تیرۆر. ئایا میدیا چۆن ئەتوانێت بەرەنگاری گروپە تیرۆریستەکان ببێتەوە، بەتایبەتی لە تۆڕە کۆمەڵایەتیەکان و هەروەها لە میدیای بیستراو و بینراو و هەروەها میدیای خوێنراو. ئێمە زانین لە ساڵی 1991 گۆڕانکاری گەورە شۆڕشی تەکنەلۆجیا ڕوویدا، بەتایبەتی لەو کاتێکە ڕۆژنامەنووسە ئەمریکیەکان هاتن ڕووداوەکانی شەڕی عێراق و ئەمریکایان گواستەوە لە بەرەکانی شەڕەوە بۆ کەناڵی CNN ئەمریکی. ئەمە بووە خاڵی دەستپێکی گۆڕانکاری و یان بڵێن خاڵی دەستپێکی شۆڕشی میدیا لە جیهاندا. لەبەرچی ئەم شۆڕشە ڕوویدا، لەبەر ئەوە کە پێویست بوو هەنگاوێکی گەورەتر لە بواری میدیا بنرێت بۆ ئەوەی هەموو جیهان ئاگاداری ڕووداوەکانی کۆمەڵێک شەڕ و کێشە بەتایبەتی لە ڕۆژهەڵاتی ناوەڕاست. ئەگەر بێت و باسی تیرۆریش بکەین، بێگومان چونکە میدیا و تیرۆر لە پەیوەندی بەردەوامدان بەیەکەوە، ئەبینین کە گروپە تیرۆریستەکان ئێستا بەهۆی میدیاوە کە زۆر تەشەنەیان سندووە، هەر ئەو گروپە بچووکانە نین کە جاران هەبوون، ئێستا بوون بە گروپی گەورە و خاوەنی دەسەڵاتن و کەسانی شارەزایان هەیە لە بواری میدیا. گروپە تیرۆریستەکان جاران گروپی بچووک بوون و یان بڵێن گروپی داخراو بوون ئێستا ئەو گروپانە کراونەتەوە و هەروەها هەندێک ئەحزاب هەنا بە تایبەتی لە ڕۆژهەڵاتی ناوەڕاست کە باڵی سەربازیان هەیە و باڵی داوایان هەیە باڵە سەربازیەکانیان زۆر جار کاری تیرۆریستیان ئەنجام داوە و هەروەها ئێستا کێشکە بینین لە هەندێک وڵاتانی عەرەبی گروپی ئیخوان المسلمینمان هەیە کە باڵی عەسکەری هەیە کە چەند کەسایەتێکی لە مسر تیرۆر کردیە گروپی حەماس هەیە گروپی عەسائب ئەهل الحەق هەیە گروپی بەیت المەقدەس هەیە کە سەربازە مسریەکان لە سینە ئەکوژن و لە هەمووشیان ترسناکتر گروپی داعشە گروپە تیرۆریستیەکان سوودێکی زۆر لە میدیا وەرئەگرن لە ساڵی 1997 تەنها 12 سایتی ئینتەرنێت هەبوو کە گروپە تیرۆریستەکان بۆ کاری میدیایی بەکاریان ئەهێنا بۆ بڵاوکردنەوەی ترس و تۆقاندن و تعبیئەکردنی خەڵک یان تەجنیدکردنی خەڵک بۆ ناو گروپەکانیان و هەروەها بۆ بەڕێوەبردنی کاروباری ئابووری و بازرگانیان لە جیهاندا یان بە تایبەتی لە وڵاتانی عەرەبی بەڵام ئەمڕۆ کە ساڵی 2015 5800 سایتی ئەلکترۆنی هەیە کە بەدەست گروپە تیرۆریستەکانەوە بۆ گەیاندنی چالاکیەکانیان بۆ هەر دەزانین کە زۆر جار لە قەناتی جەزیرە ئوسامە بن لادن شریتە ڤیدیۆیەکانی بڵاو ئەکردەوە ئەمانە هەموویان بەهۆی میدیاوە گەشەیان کرد و هەروەها پەرەیان سند و گروپی داعشیش یەکێکە لەو گروپانەی کە بەڕاستی کەسانی شارەزا و پسپۆر لە بواری هەندەسە و لە بواری میدیا و هەروها لە بواری ڕۆژنامەوانی لەگەڵیاندایە دەتوانن بە شێوەیەکی باش سوود لە میدیا وەربگرن. ئێمە لێرەدا باسی ئەوە ئەکەین کە ئایا چۆن بتوانین کە ڕوبەڕووی تیرۆر ببینەوە لە میدیاوە چونکە شەڕی داعش ڕاستە ئێمە وەکو کورد 1050 کیلۆمەتر ئێمە لە ڕوبەڕووبوونەوەی لەگەڵ داعش بەڵام شەڕی داعش تەنها بە چەک ناکرێت بەڵکو ئەبێ ئێمە لە ڕووی فکریەوە محارەبەی داعش بکەین و نابێ ئەوەش بشارینەوە کە لە کوردستانیش زۆر خانەی نووسوو هەنا لە کوردستانیش زۆر کەس چوونە ناو گروپەکانی داعش ئەمەش بەهۆی ئەو وتارە ئاینیانەی کە لە زۆربەی مزگەوتەکان لە کوردستاندا بڵاو ئەکرانەوە و کاریگەری هەبوو لەسەر گەنجەکانمان و بێگومان لە ڕێی ئینتەرنێتەوە کە زۆر جار پەیوەندی ئەکەن بە گەنجەکانەوە بە تایبەتی ئەو کەسانەی کە لە ڕووی فکریەوە لاوازن ئەتوانن زۆرتر کاریگەریان لێ بکەن. پەیوەندی میدیا و تیرۆر ئێستا بووە بە پەیوەندیەکی بازنەیی لەکوێوە دەست پێ ئەەکەین ئەگەڕێینەوە بۆ هەمان شوێن لەبەر ئەوە ئەگەر باسی میدیا بەگشتی بکەین ئەبینین کە کاریگەریەکی زۆری هەیە ڕۆلی میدیا لە ڕۆلی پەروەردە کەمتر نییە لە پەروەردەکردنی کۆمەلگا بە تایبەتی تەلەڤیزیۆن کە ئەمڕۆ کە بۆتە ئەو سندوقە ڕەنگا و ڕەنگەی کە لە هەموو ماڵێکدا هەیە و کاریگەری هەیە بەسەر جۆری قسەکردن جۆری جلەبەرکردن جۆری خواردن جۆری چێشلێنان لە ماڵەکاندا کەواتە میدیا ڕەنگە هەندێک جار ڕۆڵی زیاتر بێ لە ڕۆلی پەروەردە لە قوتابخانەکاندا بەڵام ئەبێ ئێمە دیاری بکەین ئایا کاری میدیا چییە ئایا کاری میدیا ئەوەیە کە بە بەردەوامی هەواڵی تیرۆر و تیرۆریستان بگوازێتەوە یا ئەوە تا پێویستە ئەو هەواڵانەی کە دەربارەی تیرۆر ئەیان گوازێتەوە هەواڵی سنووردار بن. کاری میدیا ئەزانین بریتە لە پێدانی زانیاری و گواستنەوەی هەواڵ و هەروەها ئاشناکردنی کۆمەڵگە و خەڵک بەو ڕووداوانەی کە لە ناو کۆمەڵگە ڕوودەدەن چ لە بواری سیاسی بێ لە بواری کۆمەڵایەتی لە بواری ئابووری و بە مەبەستی دروستکردنی ڕایگشتی لە ناو کۆمەڵگەدا بۆ کێشەکان بۆ نمونە ئێستا میدیای کوردی هیچ کاتێک نەیتوانیوە ڕایگشتی لەسەر ڕوودا و کێشەکان دروستکە بۆ نمونە بینین لە شارێکی وەکو سلەیمانی خۆپیشاندان ئەکرێ لە هەولێر و دهۆک ناکرێت کەواتە ئەو میدیایە کە ئەوان زۆر جار بە تۆپخانە ناوی ئەبەن نەیانتوانیوە ڕایگشتی لە کوردستان دروستکە هیچ میدیایەکی کوردستان ناتوانێت ڕایگشتی سەبارەت بە کێشەکان دروستکە لەبەر ئەوەی میدیا لە کوردستان ئازاد نییە. دروستکردنی کۆدەنگی ئێمە بینین لە زۆر بابەتە تەنانەت کە ئێستا کوردستان بە قەیرانێکی ئابووری سەختدا تێپەڕێ تا ئێستا لە هەموو شارەکانی کوردستان کۆدەنگی نییە لەسەر کێشەی ئابووری لەسەر موچە. ئێستا ئەو دوو ڕۆژە لە سلەیمانی بوون زۆر کەسمان دیت پێیان وایە لە هەولێر موچە ئەدرێ بەڵام لە سلەیمانی نادرێت کەواتە میدیا نەیتوانیوە ڕۆڵێکی گرنگ ببینێ وە کۆدەنگیەک لە ناو هاونیشتمانیان دروستکاتن بۆ ئەوەی کە بیرروبۆچوونەکانیان تێڕوانینیان بەرامبەر بە ڕوودا و قەیرانەکان لە سەرتاسەری کوردستان وەکو یەک بێن. ڕۆڵی میدیا بە پلە یەکەم دەبێت میدیا هۆشیارکەرەوە بێ و یارمەتی خەڵکدا بۆ تێگەیشتن لە کێشەکان چونکە تا ئێستا زۆر کەس لە ئێمە لە مەسلەی تیرۆرە دوو ڕای جیاواز هەیە. هەندێک کەس پێیان وایە کە ئەمانە گروپێکی تیرۆریستین خەڵکە کوژن خەڵک سەرابڕن سوکایەتی بە پیرۆزی نەتەوەیەکەکەن بەڵام هەندێک کەس پێیان وایە کە داعش و گروپە تیرۆریستەکانی تر بۆ ئەو مەبەستە دروست بوون لە کاردانەوەی بەرامبەر بەو سیاسەتەی کە لە ڕۆژهەڵاتی ناوەڕاستەیە سیاسەتی قەمعکردن سیاسەتی نەبوونی دادپەروەری کۆمەڵایەتی یعنی ئەوەیان بۆ ئەهێننەوە بەڵگەیان بۆ ئەهێننەوە کە گروپە تیرۆریستەکان تەنها لە خۆیانەوە دروست نەبوون بەڵکو ئەمانە کاردانەوەیە دژی حکومڕانی و سیاسەتی ئەو دەوڵەتانەی کە لێ دروست بوو. بەڵام ئێمە ئەگەر بگەڕێینەوە بۆ دروستبوونی گروپە ئیسلامیەکان کە ئێستا زۆربەی تیرۆریستەکان لەسەرەوە کارەکەن لە ساڵی 1928 کە گروپی ئیخوان المسلمین دروست بوو بە پارەی بەریتانیا دروست بوو و هەروەها بە دەستی دەرەکی دروست بوو بۆ دژایەتیکردنی حکمی مەلەکی لە مەسر. بەڵام گروپە ئیسلامیەکانی تر کە لە وڵاتان دروست بوون بۆ نمونە گومانی ئەوە دەکرێت کە زۆربەیان یان ئەوە تا گروپی نێودەوڵەتینە بۆ نمونە حرەکەی ئیخوان المسلمین لە سەرتاسەری دنیادا کە حرەکەیەکی نێودەوڵەتیە. بەڵام ئەحزابی تری ئیسلامی بێگومان ئەم حیزبانە زۆربەیان حیزبی محەلینە یعنی نێونەتەوەی نین بەڵام لەگەڵ ئەوشە پەیوەندیان هەیە بە وڵاتانەی کە لە بیر و بۆچوونەکانیانەوە نزیکن. بۆیە هەندێک لەو حیزبانەش بێگومان هەڕەشەن بەسەر ئاسایشی نەتەوەیی لە کوردستان و لەبەر ئەوە پێویستە حکوومەت هەنگاو بنێتن بۆ ئەوەی چالاکی ئەو گروپانە چالاکی هەندێک بانکخواز و هەندێک بانگەشە بۆ تیرۆرە. لێرەدا دوو پرسیار دێتە پێشەوە بۆ ئێمە ئایا میدیا چی بکات؟ ئایا میدیا هەموو چالاکیەکانی گروپە تیرۆریستەکانی وەکو داعش بڵاو بکاتەوە و هەروەها چ بەرنامەیەکی هەبێ بۆ هۆشیارکردنەوەی ڕایگشتی و کەناڵەکان چی بکەن بۆ ئەوەی کە تەلەڤیزیۆن وەکو وتمان کاریگەری زیاتری هەیە لە رادیۆ و لە ڕۆژنامەکان. بڕوای من کاری یەکەمی گروپە میدیایەکان ئەوەیە کە پێویستە لە میدیاکان لە کەناڵەکانی ڕاگەیاندن بە شێوەی ئەنجامدانی مێزگرت بەبێ ئەوەی کە وێنەی قوربانیەکان نیشاندن وێنەی کوژراوەکان نیشاندن و هەروەها وێنەی یان لاشەی تیرۆریستەکان پیشاندن پێویستە لە ڕێگەی مێزگردەوە کە خەڵکانی پسپۆر لەو بوارەوە بێنن خەڵک ئاشنا بکەن بەم گروپە تیرۆریستانە و هەروەها ڕای جیاواز دروست ببێت سەبارەت بە گروپە تیرۆریستەکان و مەترسی ئەو گروپانەش لەسەر خەڵک لەسەر ئاسایشی نەتەوەی لەسەر ئاسایشی ئابووری کۆمەڵایەتی بخرێتە ڕوو. لەبەر ئەوە ئەو کەناڵانش کە زۆرترین بینەریان هەیە بێگومان ئەمانە دەبێت بەرپرسیارەتی گەورە بخرێتە ئەستۆیان چونکە لە ڕێگەی بەرنامەکانەوە ئەتوانن ئەچنە هەموو ماڵێکەوە توانن ڕۆڵ و کاریگەری گرنگیان هەبێ بەسەر خەڵکە. ینی ئەبینین ئەم گروپانە ئەمڕۆکە کە تۆڕە کۆمەڵایەتیەکانی وەکو فەیسبوک و ئەمانەش بەکاردەهێنن بە تایبەتی تویتەر و فەیسبوک سیر ئەەکەین کە خەریکە فکرەی ئازادی خوازی یان لەناو کۆمەلگادا بەش ئەبێت. هەندێک پێیان وایە کە ئەم گروپە تیرۆریستانە بەرگری لە مافی هەژار و فەقیرەکان ئەکەن و هەندێکی تر پێیان وایە ئەمانە گروپی تیرۆریستین و لەژێر پەردەی دینەوە ئەتوانن کە بە بەڵگەی قورئان و هەروەها فقه و دەستور و شەریعەت بتوانن ئەو کار یعنی کە ڕێگە پێدراون ئەم کارانە ئەکەن. بۆیە ئەمە مەترسێکی زۆر زۆر گەورە لەسەر کۆمەڵگا موسڵمانەکان دروست دەکات، چونکە ناکرێ ئێمە بین دان بۆ گروپە تیرۆریستانە دابڕین، چونکە تەنانەت دوای لێ هاتووە ئێستا هەندێک لە موسڵمانەکانیش تووڕە بوون لەسەر کاری ئەم گروپە تیرۆریستیانە لەبەرچی لەبەر ئەوەی ئیسلامیش ئێستا بوو بە دوو بەشەوە و چەندین مەزهەبی هەیە. بۆ نمونە لە مەزهەبی وهابیەکاندا مەسەلەی تیرۆر و توند و تیژی کە ئەمڕۆ بینین لە سعودیە ممارەسە ئەکرێتن، ئەوەی دزی ئەکات دەستی ئەبرن، ئەوەی قسەیەک بکاتن سەری ئەپەڕێنن، ئەم شتانە ماوە. لەبەر ئەوە باڵێکی تر هەیە یان بڵێن مەزهەبێکی تر هەیە لە ئیسلامدا کە دژی ئەم توند و تیژیانەنەوە. هەروەها ئیسلام بە ئاینێکی هێمن و لەسەرخۆ ئاینی ئاشتی ئەزانن. بۆیە ئەم گروپە تیرۆریستانە ناکۆچیان خستۆتە نێو مەزهەبەکانی ئیسلامەوە، هەرچەندە ئێستا ئەبینین کە ئەوەی حەشدی شەعبی دەیکا هیچی لە گروپە تیرۆریستەکانی وەکو داعش و ئەمانە کەمتر نییە. لەبەر ئەوە ئێستا ئیسلامیش بەهۆی ئەو هەموو وێنەیە کە لە میدیاوە بڵاو ئەکرێتەوە ئەمانیش بوون بە دوو بەشەوە. گروپی تیرۆریستیەکان بێگومان لە ڕێگەی میدیاوە وای لێ هاتووە کە یعنی ناوی بنین ئرهاب المروج في الميديا في الإعلام، يعني ئێستا وای لێ هاتووە کەناڵی ڕاگەیاندنەکان و بەشێکی زۆری لە ڕۆژنامە نووسەکان ئەوەنە هەواڵی گروپە تیرۆریستەکان بڵاو ئەکەنەوە و هەندێک جاریش کە هەڵئەستن بە ئەنجامدانی سڵح لە بینی گروپە تیرۆریستەکان و لە بینی خەڵکانی تر کە خەڵک لێ تێکچوو ئایا ڕۆژنامە نووسەکان بە تایبەتی تێوە گلاون لەگەڵ گروپە تیرۆریستەکان یان نا. لەبەر ئەوە دەبینین کە هەندێک لە ڕۆژنامە نووسەکان بە تایبەتی کە پەیوەندی نهێنیان هەیە لەگەڵ گروپە تیرۆریستەکان، چونکە زۆر جار ئەبینین کە ڕۆژنامە نووسێکی وەکو یوسری فۆدە کە یەکێکە لە ڕۆژنامە نووسە هەرە ناودارەکان لە مەسر پەیوەندی کردووە بە گروپە تیرۆریستەکانەوە و لە ڕێ ئەوانەوە هاتووە بۆ سووریا و بۆ هەروەها کار و چالاکیەکانی ئەو گروپانەی ئێستا لە کتێبێکە لە مەسر چاپی کردووە. ئەبینین کە ئەم پەیوەندێکی گوماناویە، چونکە ناکرێتەوە کار و چالاکی و چۆنیەتی چوون بۆ ناو گروپە تیرۆریستەکان بڵاوکەیتەوە. بۆیە زۆر جار میدیا ناتوانێت بە باشی هەڵسوکەوت لەگەڵ هەواڵ و هەروەهایان لە کاتی تەنگەژەکاندا ناتوانێت هەڵسوکەوتێکی دروست بکە. زۆر جار ئەو هەواڵ و زانیاریانەی کە بڵاوی ئەکاتەوە بێتە کارێکی سلبی بۆ کۆمەڵگا، بەڵام بە پێچەوانەوە خزمەتی بیرۆکەی تیرۆریستی ئەەکەم. و زۆر جار ڕۆژنامە نووسان هەروەکو ئێرهابیەکان وەکو تیرۆریستەکان سەرقاڵی بڵاوکردنەوەی ترس و تۆقاندنن لە کەناڵەکانی ڕاگەیاندنەوە و ئەمەش کاریگەری خراپی هەیە بۆ سەر دەروون و هەروەها بۆ سەر ئاسایشی نەتەوەی. تەنانەت لە ئێستادا هەموو برێک نیوز هەواڵی بەپەلە بۆتە هەواڵی تیرۆریستی و هەواڵی تەقاندنەوە. ئەوانەیە کە لە پاریس ڕوویدا ڕەنگە هەمومان بینی بێتمان کە چەندین سەعاتی دوور و درێژ بە دیار کەناڵەکانەوە دانیشتین بۆ ئەوەی دوا هەواڵ و زانیاریەکان سەبارەت بە تیرۆر بزانین. بەڵام کاری هەرە گرنگ ئەوەیە کە میدیا بە شێوەیەکی پرۆفێشنال کارکە ڕاوێژکاری هەبێتن و هەروەها خەڵکی شارەزای هەبێ بۆ ئەوەی بزانێت چ مادەیەک باشە بۆ پەخشکردن و چ مادەیەک کە نابێ پەخش بکرێ لە میدیاکانەوە. چونکە گروپە تیرۆریستەکان پشت بە میدیا ئەبەستن، پشت بە ڕۆژنامەنووسان دەبەستن لە گواستنەوەی هەواڵەکانە. کاتێکیش کە کەناڵێکی تەلەڤیزیۆنی هەواڵی تەقاندنەوە و چالاکیەکانی داعش بڵاو دەکاتەوە، بێگومان ئەوان هەست بە خۆشیەکەکەن کە بینن هەواڵی تەقاندنەوەکان خۆکوشتنەکان لە کەناڵەکان حکومی یان حیزبی یان هەر کەناڵێک بڵاو ئەکرێتەوە. بۆیە ئیمڕۆ ئێمە پێویستمان بەوەیە کە بەڕاستی بە شێوەیەکی جددی لەسەر میدیا کار بکەین و هەروەها خەڵک هۆشیار بکەینەوە لە ڕووی فکریەوە کە دژایەتی داعش بکەن، نەک تەنها پێشمەرگە لە بەڕەکانی شەردا. و کاری میدیاش بەڕاستی 5 کاری سەرەکیە کە ئەبێ بیزانین: پێدانی زانیاری دروست، شیکردنەوەی هەواڵ و هۆکاری ڕوودانی ڕووداوەکان، دروستکردنی تەبایی کۆمەڵایەتی و پاڵەپەستۆی دەرونی و یعنی لەسەر خەڵک کەم بکاتەوە و هەروەها پێشکەشکردنی هەندێک بەرنامەی تەرفیهی بە تایبەتی بۆ گەنجان کە ئێمە دەبینین لە میدیاکانماندا تەنها هەواڵ و زانیاری وەردەگرین، بەڵام هیچ بابەتێکی تەرفیهی ئەوتۆ نییە. بۆ نمونە بەرنامەی تۆکشۆ هەیە لە کەناڵەکانی هەتا عەرەبی، کەناڵی ئەوروپی، بەڵام لە کەناڵە کوردیەکاندا بایەخ بەم بوارە نەدراوە. بەرنامەیەکی زانستی نییە سەبارەت بە کێشە کۆمەڵایەتیەکان، سەبارەت بە کێشەی ژن، سەبارەت بە مناڵی کورد زۆر بێبەشە لە بواری میدیایە کە هیچ بەرنامەیەکی جوانی نییە بۆ ئەوەی وەکو منداڵی هەر وڵاتێکی تر گوێ لەو بەرنامانە بگرێ و چێژی لێ وەربگرێتن. بۆیە من لە کۆتاییدا لەبەر ئەوە من هێواش قسە ئەەکەم، هەندێک کاتی ترم پێویستە. یعنی دەبێ ئایا میدیا چی بکە؟ دەبێ میدیا هەموو چالاکیەکانی تیرۆریستان بڵاو بکاتەوە. خۆی ئەم دوو پرسیارەکە دەبێ هەموو کەناڵێکی میدیایی لە خۆی بکات. ئایا میدیا چۆن هەواڵەکان بڵاو بکاتەوە بۆ ئەوەی ببێتە ڕێکلام بۆ تیرۆریستەکان؟ چونکە پەیوەندی میدیا و تیرۆر وەکو وتمان گروپە تیرۆریستەکان پەیوەندیەکی بازنەیە و هەندێک پێیان وایە هەواڵەکان هۆشداری لای خەڵک دروستەکە، هەندێک تر پێیان وایە نەخێر هەواڵەکان بە تایبەتی ئەو کەسانێک کە مەیلی کاری تیرۆریستیان هەیە یان پەروەردەیان خراپ بۆ شەڕانگێزن، ڕەنگە کاریگەری لەسەریان دابنێ و وا بچن بۆ ناو گروپە تیرۆریستەکان و کاری تیرۆریستی ئەنجام بدەن. بێگومان کوشتنی هەر کەسێک کارێکی تیرۆریستی، سوکایەتی لێدان، کوشتن لەسەر شەرف، ئەمانە هەمووی ئەچێتە خانەی تیرۆریستیەوە. بەڵام ئەبێ میدیا سنوورێک دابنێ بۆ بڵاوکردنەوەی هەواڵ و زانیاری داعش و هەروەها زۆر دەوڵەتان هەوڵ ئەدەن لە ڕێگەی هاکەرەکانیانەوە کە سایتی ئەلکترۆنی ئەو گروپانە هاک بکەن بۆ ئەوەی نەتوانن هەواڵ و زانیاری ترسناک و بڵاو بکەنەوە و پەیوەندی بکەن بە خەڵکەوە و تەجنیدی خەڵک بکەن. و گروپێکی تر پێیان وایە دەبێت ئێمە زۆر بە هۆشیاریەوە مامەلە لەگەڵ مەلەفی ئیرهاب بکەین، بە تایبەتی لەلایەنی فکریەوە ئێمە بتوانین شەڕی ئیرهاب بکەین و ئەو هەواڵانێک کە لە میدیاکانیش بڵاو دەکرێتەوە نەبێتە ڕێکلامێک بۆ داعش. چونکە داعش و هەموو گرۆپە تیرۆریستەکانی تر ئەگەر میدیا نەبێ ئەوان دەمرن، چونکە ناتوانن لە ئێستادا کە جیهان بۆتە گوندێکی بچووک ناتوانن کار و چالاکیەکانیان بڵاوکەنەوە. و پێویستە میدیای کوردیش بەڕاستی بە هۆشیاریەوە مامەڵە لەگەڵ ئەو مەلەفە بکاتن و هەروە هەندێک بایەخ بەلانی دەرونی و کەمکردنەوەی پاڵپەستۆی دەرونی لەسەر خەڵکە، چونکە ئەمڕۆکە قەیرانی دارایی و سیاسی و هەموو قەیرانەکان لە کوردستان نەبوونیان هەیە بۆ ئەوەی مرۆڤ بتوانێت لەم ئەزمەی ئێستادا هەناسەیەک بە ئاسوودەیی هەڵمژێت. زۆر سپاس بۆ ئێوە.
زۆر سپاس بۆ بەڕێستامان شاکر بۆ بابەتەکەی. ئێستا بەڕێز سۆفی موسا بابەتەکەی خۆی پێشکەشەکە، بابەتەکەی بناونیشانی Kurdish women while fighting ISIS in front line, the case of Yazidis. Sophie, please. Floor is yours. Thank you.
I apologize, my English is not very good. So if you don't understand well what I'm saying, please let me know and I will ask someone to help me. I know some people here are speaking French, maybe they can help me. So please hang up your hand or do something if you don't understand me, okay? So I was trying to study with Juliette, first of all, women who are fighting because I've read in some studies that some journalists were asking, and they were not so sure that women were really fighting in front line and fighting really against ISIS. So I was very surprised because we have seen a lot of reports and even films. We have seen a lot of pictures showing women fighting. So we decided to try to see and what was the reality about that. And in fact, we have met some women of the Peshmergas, and that's right that the women of the Peshmergas are not really fighting in the front line. They are securizing the zone. Do you understand me when I say that? Because I can hear the words, it's not so good. They are more making instruction, cultural thing, instruction for people, for the new women who are arriving and so on. There is a new battalion who is made by a Yazidi woman. She was a singer. Her name is Khate. I don't know if you have heard about her. By the way, she has a bad reputation. Maybe because she was a singer, maybe because the reputation is made by men, probably. But we have met her. We were very impressed, I have to say. She's a strong woman. She's Yazidis. She has 500 women under her, with her battalion. And her argument is very interesting. She says, we had to create this battalion because otherwise all our women are going to join the PKK. And the fact is, I was, just yesterday and the day before, I was with the PKK in Sinjar. And yes, it's true. All the Yazidi women who want to fight have joined the PKK. So her argument was a very good one. So I just have a little more to say about Khate. She said something also very interesting. She said, before I was a singer, and I was singing, comment on dit les exploits?
To explore.
Les exploits des hommes? Les exploits, les exploits, the big fights?
Tu peux le mettre dans un contexte, pardon, je n'ai pas compris.
Les exploits des hommes, les grands faits, oui, comment on le dit en anglais? The big fights of the women, the big fights of the fighters of Peshmergas. She was singing that.
Struggle.
The big struggles, the big success, the big success of the Peshmergas. She was singing that before, but now she is doing her own success, the women's success. So that was interesting. I love that. We love that. Well, so now I've spent 2 days with a Yazidis girl fighting with the PKK in the mountain. I met, by the way, the first Yazidi girl who had joined the PKK. Her surname is Dersin. And I can tell you her story, if you want. The 3 of August 1914, you know, the Black Day, she was very well hidden with her 3 sisters. Her mother is dead, Two of her brothers have been kidnapped. She has seen her aunt, her cousins, all of her neighbors who have been taken by ISIS. The Arabs, they were all of, they were their neighbors. They gone and they all came back in black, with black clothes of the ISIS. They came back and they have taken everyone. So she was very shocked, of course. And at that moment, she saw dushka. And on that, you know what is a dushka? Dushka is this very big vehicle, yeah. And on that dushka, it was a girl from the PKK, and she was, and that dushka pushed away a big number of ISIS, and she said, "I want to join them," of course. And she knew some people. She had a friend. She knows a boy who was belonging to the PKK, and she came to this boy, and she asked to join them. In fact, the PKK at the beginning they didn't want. They say you have to do your own group to fight, but finally they decided to create the Yebeshe, the group of army for the Yazidis. So at the beginning of September, they created the Yebeshe. So they trained very quickly with the weapons, and they began to create this group. And she entered this group with 3 sisters and 2 of her brothers. What she says about that is very interesting. She says that she is fighting for Taros Melek, her angel, the angel of the Yazidis, and also for all the women who have been kidnapped and raped, of course. She said that after what she has seen, she never feels angst or fear. She's never afraid. And what she feels when she's fighting, she has spent 1 month in the front line, 1 month. And she says that was the best days of her life. The best days of her life. The best moment. She is very surprising. She has a face like an angel. You could not imagine she has suffered so much. She is always smiling. And she is very surprising. She says she doesn't feel hate for Muslims or Arabs, only for ISIS. And so now, of course, with the PKK, I have a lot of other. I met some other women who were with her. Of course, I can tell you how they live. They wake up at 5 in the morning. They have some breakfast and some time together. Then they have a meeting, all of them. I could not participate at that meeting because it's a meeting of some kind of propaganda, I suppose, or some meeting, all of them together. Then they have a lot of exercise to. When I was with them, for example, they were building a wall to protect them. So it was a very hard job. And then they have to cook as well. So the Yebeshe is exactly like a family. They are talking about what they imagine for their future. I asked them. A lot of them, they don't imagine any life out of the Yebeshe. They just imagine to fight all their life. They even don't imagine their life after 35 years old, because after 35 years old, normally they don't fight anymore. but they can't imagine their life after this age. They just want to make women free, but you know, they don't have any phone number, they don't have email address, and they don't have even their name they had before. Their family have no news from her, except the Yazidis. The Yazidis who have their family in the Sinjar, they can take news from their family. Well, that's what I have seen. I'm sorry, I have not prepared anything because I came back in the night, so I have no time to prepare something very well organized. That's what I can tell you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie, for your interesting interviews. Of course, maybe it's very interesting days that you spend it there. Yes. Thank you. پێشکەشکاری داهاتوومان دکتۆر نەزەنبەگی خانیە بابەتەکەی لە سەبارەت بە ژن و میدیا و تووتیژی لە فەزای مەجازی دژی ژنان Women and Media, Cyber Violence Against Women in Kurdish Community.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for MERI to have organized in collaboration with the Gender and Violence Study Center at the University of Suleimania, and thank you for inviting us today to address this very interesting seminar just a day before the International Day to Combat Violence Against Women. And from tomorrow in Kurdistan region, we launch 16 days of campaign to combat violence against women. So it's a very special day. I'm going to talk, as Juan Khan said, about women in media, cyber violence against women in Kurdish communities. Cyber violence, I just say it in Kurdish, بەیانیتان باش زۆر خۆشحاڵم کە ئەمڕۆ لێرەم ئەم سیمینارە بە هاوکاری ئینستیتیوی ڕۆژهەڵاتی ناوەڕاست بۆ توێژینەوە لەگەڵ سنتەری خوێندنی جەندەر و توندوتیژی لە زانکۆی سلێمانی ئامادەکراوە. من زۆر سپاسیان دەکەم کە ئەمڕۆ میوانداری ئێمەیان کردووە بۆ پێشکەشکردنی ئەم وتارانە. بابەتەکەی من تایبەتە بە ژن و میدیا، بەڵام تەرکیز دەخەمە سەر فەزای مەجازی ئێستا لە ئەدەبیاتی ئینتەرنێت و تایبەت بە میدیای ئینتەرنێت یا سەرخەت پێی دەڵێن سایبەر ڤایۆلەنس، واتە توندوتیژی لە فەزای مەجازی لە دژی ژن. هیوادارم بتوانم بەکاری بێنم. بەڵێ زۆر بە کورتی دیارەتامان خان باسی میدیای کرد بە شێوەیەکی زۆر جوان، بەڵام من زۆر بە کورتی sorry, I'm going to speak in English. Sorry. I'm going to briefly try to define the role of the media and then also present the methodology that I used in order to conduct this piece of research. I mean, we all know that, as Taman said, that media is a powerful set of actors in society. Outlets, different media outlets, whether it can be press, TV, radio, or internet platforms, have the capacity to inform and to allow for debate and deliberation. They do play a very important part in the process of governance, ideological culture and cultural formation, and at the end they have a very important role in decision making. Just a little background about media in Kurdistan. We all know that the first Kurdish newspaper was published in exile in 1898 by a group of intellectuals, but later media became very kind of political party affiliated outlets. So in that sense, they do lack independence, and they serve as transmission belt for party agenda. And unfortunately, in this situation, very little space is devoted to issues rather than politics. I mean, everything is politics and political, but politics is narrowed down to political parties in some contexts. In that situation, little space is given to societal and women's issues. But we, in the last 3 decades, luckily, women's rights groups, women's organizations started to publish their own newspapers and journals, and these publications started to challenge the dominant patriarchal situation. And with women's publications, violence against women and honor-based violence received wide coverage, and also later on, mainstream media also started to integrate these issues. But in Kurdistan, we still have a very critical media environment, and the media, especially the online media or cyber media, internet media, have played a double-sided role. It affected our life in 2 different ways. I conducted this research, it's part of a wider research on honor-based violence that I started with Professor Jill Haig as part of a research project funded by the clergy and conducted by the University of Bristol in collaboration with some other organizations, including Roehampton University and Kurdish Women's Rights Watch. But the data has been updated, and the last piece of field work included in this research was conducted between January to August 2015 by 2 colleagues at the University of Suleimaniye's Gender and Violence Studies Center, Dr. Najad and Dr. Nian, who couldn't join us here today. In the process of the research, we mainly monitored media, different media channels, media outlets, including 10 women's publications, Jianawa, Rewan, Where, Warvin at the time it was still on, and so on, and 10 mainstream newspapers, I can mention. I mean, we focused on those which are directly affiliated to political parties like Kurdistan and Khabat, but also semi-independent or privately owned media such as Hawlati, Awena, Rudau, and also we monitored 7 TV networks plus radio programs and their respective websites. Throughout this process, with my colleagues, we interviewed media editors, women's rights groups, and also those who work on these issues in government institutions, especially at the Directorates to Combat Violence Against Women and shelters. We also organized roundtable meetings to discuss these issues with different actors, including journalists, media editors, and women's rights activists. Overall, we conducted 64 interviews as well as 12 in-depth interviews with victims, those women who've been exposed to cyber stalking and abuse. I briefly try to talk about women's media, mainstream media, and then I go back to cyber media and how women have been affected. I mean, women's media, they are affiliated mainly to NGOs, but these NGOs, for those who are familiar of history of feminism and history of women's rights groups in Kurdistan, we know that they all are affiliated and were born inside political parties. So they are not totally independent. By independent, I mean financially, but also editorially. So they, during our monitoring process, we realized that these media outlets can really serve as important archive and index of development or of the progress that women made in terms of coverage, but also coverage of the reality of women in different parts of Kurdistan. Through that operation, they started to challenge the monopoly of the mainstream media, which is highly patriarchal, male-based, dominated by men in terms of women. Men really are on the top positions. We don't have any women as editor-in-chief of any mainstream media in Kurdistan. I had the privilege to be the editor-in-chief of Le Monde Diplomatique for 3 years. Kagaso is here, who was working with me, but the paper has been suspended now for 2 years. They are not very active, these women's rights, the women's media, different women's publications. They haven't been very active in developing an informed discussion or analysis of patriarchal barriers. They lack professionalism. This is true for all media channels in Kurdistan. And they do cover sensitive issues, but they stress in a moralistic tone moral and correct conduct of women. Like, for example, virginity, kcheni, is an important issue. If they touch upon this issue, it has to be within the framework of the moralistic behavior of the society. They don't go beyond that moralistic tone. And they do not question the dominant understanding of masculinity. Piao tiu zalbuni de salati piao nakhanaje prsiaro. Okay. Is everything okay? Yeah? Yeah, sorry. And while mainstream media, they are highly male-based, as I said, and they have dedicated limited space to women's issues. I mean, they started after women's publication, integrated these issues into their coverage, and they are mainly interested in violence against women and honor-based violence. They do from time to time brief news reporting, but their reports are not evidence-based, they are not nuanced, and they are not, you can't find subtle analysis of the situation. Generally speaking, media is not objective in Kurdistan, and as I said, they are party affiliated, and those which are directly affiliated to political parties, they are really hesitant about challenging basis of power. But those that call themselves privately owned or independent, I put it between quotation marks because I'm not sure how independent they are. Those newspapers, they fail to recognize government achievements, while the political party-affiliated newspapers, they are not objective, and they don't question and criticize the basis of power. On the other side, the others are not trying to develop a critical discourse. The mainstream media lack, as I said, critical thinking and gender sensitivity. For example, they don't question the existing notions of honor. When a woman is killed, one of the case studies we used in our research concerned a journalist and a poet, a female journalist and a poet, Begat Hussein, who was killed here in Erbil by her ex-husband. The next morning, the so-called privately owned newspaper, Hawlati, went to interview the murderer, and in a way that justified the murder, saying that the woman was infidel and she had a lover, although they were separated, but divorce was not pronounced. So you can tell how the patriarchal values and practices are reproduced. Not only they are not challenged, but they are reproduced in these media outlets. And here we can notice that media ethics are not respected. And when it comes to televisions and radios, we did look at Radio Nawa, Kurdistan TV, Kurdsat, Rudao. We noticed that they don't have long-term programs dealing with women's issues. Occasionally, for example, when we have the 16 days of campaign to combat violence against women, suddenly everyone is interested in women's issues, and after the 16 days, there is total silence, and they come back to it when a woman is killed. But in between, there is very little coverage and analysis on these issues and generally societal issues. That's true also for their websites. Cyber media. We all know that new information and communication technology emerged in a way that affected people's life throughout the world. We are talking here about Kurdistan. It arrived excessively after the fall of Saddam Hussein, and it was in a way imposed on us. There wasn't a kind of progressive development to go to it. It was imposed, and suddenly society found itself in the face of a new media called cyber media. I mean, as I said, it's all kinds of internet and cyber space publications. Every individuals in our society, based on this research, I can tell that their life has been shaped by the cyber media, generally the internet, but nowadays Facebook and Twitter to a lesser degree. As I said, the cyber media has got double-sided effects for women. These effects include cyber media really helped women to reach out to the outside world and to speak out, to engage, to go beyond their immediate geographical location, to make their voices heard and getting involved in international debates and actions. But on the other side, the cyber media placed women really in the face of new challenges. These challenges are founded on the very basis of traditional gender relations and code of honor. Cyber media is the virtual space of the social and societal space. So they reproduce structural violence. Structural violence, here I use Bourdieu's theory of structural violence in this research. The traditional gender relations, norms and values are all reproduced in the cyber media. Cyber media allowed for anonymous actors to emerge. We have people who use different names and go and play around the honor and dishonor equation. They do play a lot on the notion of honor and dishonor. And what does that lead to in a society like ours, which is the issue of honor is so highly sensitive, but also the capital, the main capital for women, for everyone, but for women mainly. These contribute to the circulation of rumor and a strong appetite for gossip and the desire to touch upon reputation and dishonoring women. Women received a lot of virtual threats, emotional abuse and coercion. Gossip and rumor affected badly the reputation of women and their families, put them under a lot of pressure. And once these gossips are in the public domain, it's very difficult to prove the opposite, even if they are rumors and gossips in most of the cases. these gossips, I mean, through the cyber media, what do these people do? They expose women's privacy and sexuality. They do play a lot around women's body and sexuality, and contravenes credibility. Of course, I mean, these affects credibility of women and their public standings, and leads to permanent dishonor and disgrace, can lead to total isolation of these women, and in some cases to suicide and murder. And those who are really affected by this form of stalking and violence are well-known female figures whose credibility and image play a vital role in their public standing. What does the game consist of? According to our research or fieldwork, they publish and circulate dishonorable and fabricated pictures and footage of women through internet and mobile phones. They write and post defamatory reports and articles against women. They hack their personal Facebooks, email accounts, and publicize their private data and send threatening texts and stalking. These acts are premeditated. They are well thought of and planned for. And there is no legal pursuit of those who are behind these crimes. Their aims are, of course, to exercise power. It's about power relation. It's about controlling and exercising women's bodies, sexualities, and lives. They seek to place well-known women under a system of control, surveillance, attack, and extreme fear, at the end, pushing them towards silence and isolation. And of course, this integrates a demagogy politics, which means inciting public emotion and outrage, and lead to a public position which is not sympathetic toward women, and inciting them against outstanding female figures, as I said, in our society. And the ultimate aim is to kill them symbolically, although our research do show that some of the women either kill themselves because they could not stand the pressure, or they've been killed by their male family members. Statistics. As I said, we looked at some statistics, but mainly in the city of Suleymaniye. We haven't been able to do that yet in Erbil and Duhok, but our aims are really to integrate these two cities before this paper is published. Between January and August 2015, my colleagues, Dr. Nian and Dr. Najat, went out and looked at statistics and conducted some field work in shelters in Suleymaniye, and also at the Directorate to Combat Violence Against Women. We have among 100, between January to August 2015, we have 127 women subjected to different forms of violence, and among them 61 were exposed to cyber violence. 56% of them were between 19 to 26 years. 51% they are not married, they are young women, girls. 82% have limited education. They've been either to primary school, or some of them to the secondary schools. 84% are housekeepers. So they don't work, they stay at home, and they're housewives. The majority of housewives, even if they are not married, they are housekeepers. They don't interact with the public space and the outside world. The majority of them live in cities. They don't live in villages and rural zones. And mobile phone and Facebook are the most important means of cyber stalking and coercion. the majority of them exposed to physical violence as the consequences of these virtual violence. How do the authorities respond to these new forms of violence? It has been addressed both at the level of policy as well as at the level of legislation. We have a law number 6, which was voted for on May 19, 2008. Sorry, there's a mistake here. I put this together last night after my trip from Soleimani. I was extremely tired. Sorry. I haven't edited. The law addressed defamation and bad use of all means of modern communication. It criminalizes misuse of means of communications leading to dishonoring and violating the private life of individuals generally. And Article 1 of the law stipulates telephone, postal, and other electronic communications fall in the field of private affairs and should not be violated. They call on companies running these means of communications like Korag Asia Cell to regulate their systems aiming to uproot anonymity. The law is very progressive when you look at it. We have been behind this law. Women's rights groups, and I have the privilege as the international advisor to the Prime Minister on higher education and gender to have advocated within the decision-making circle for such a law and new policies related to the cyber violence. It's very progressive, but unfortunately, like most of the laws and policies, not implemented, or the implementation is not effective on the ground. And in addition to that, we have another response from women's rights groups. They have been really active because most of us, Taman, myself, many women MPs, politicians, journalists like what's her name? The woman who presents Jinoujian, Avin Asso, Huda Zangana, yeah, Huda. We have been all exposed to this form of violence, not only through cyber space, but also in the mosques. We've been attacked, but I'm not talking about this here. So women's rights groups have been active in signing petitions, trying to raise awareness and to educate people. One of the petitions, the most important petitions, dates August 2013. In conclusion, what I can say is that media has a crucial role in perpetuating traditional norms and values. As I said, cultural norms, gender relations, and traditional values are reproduced through media, and Kurdish media has not been able to engender a culture of rational debate in order to help to inform public opinion and challenging traditional gender relations and gender norms. And cyber media has been used for gossip and circulation of rumors, stalking, threats, leading to dishonor women and symbolically expose them to danger and murder. That has led also to sensational coverage by some media outlets and served to mask serious tasks of media and misses the opportunity to address human rights, means women's rights. Media outlets have been very concerned about human rights since the fall of the Ba'athist regime. But it's interesting according to our field work, our research, it's interesting to conclude, and it's shocking at the same time, to conclude and to see that women's rights are not integrated in this framework of human rights. When media representatives, editors, journalists take to the street and shout and advocate for human rights and freedom of expression, as if women's rights are not part of this agenda. When a woman is killed, they don't do this. Women's rights are excluded from the general framework of human rights. And government responses, as I said, have not been focused. The policies and legislative developments fail to tackle these issues in an effective way. And the final conclusion, I'd like to quote a sentence by my colleague Hiwa Usman. In 2010, he wrote, "The unwholesome atmosphere in which the Kurdish media operates makes it easy for people to just defame, insult, or praise others with complete disregard to any code of ethics or professional standards." Thank you very much.